switch on record. So I've updated Canvas. Let me just share my screen, and we'll talk about that stuff really quickly. Share screen. And there's my desktop. So, all right. Not sure why Zoom needs more than one window, but whatever. Okay, so we're right here, 2.4, Project 2, Week 4. First and foremost, you guys have been laser cutting stuff and trying to assemble stuff. And so I'm asking between now and Wednesday for you to upload 2 to 3 photographs of, what happened. And I expect to see some good things and some not as good things. Things will, the results will be all over the place. This is the first draft, and that was expected, right? And so the key thing was to make this first prototype useful. And so I suspect for some of you, you assembled it and you figured out, by the end I was actually pretty good at assembling it or putting it together. Whereas, when I first started, it was really painful and difficult. Some of you will say, this would actually work a lot better if my notches were just a little wider than the material or a little thinner than what I used or something like that, right? So you can begin to dial in some of the parameters that you used, adjust them just a bit to achieve some sort of tolerance that you noticed from the first example, right, from the first prototype. So we'll talk about that on Wednesday after you guys upload your progress there, right? With the intentions that this week we're basically trying to integrate performance with your design of the final design of your shading components. But 2, that we're preparing your shading components and then readjusting any of your two-way waffle rib system, right? So that starting on Wednesday, any of you can start to re-laser cut for the final, okay? So if you, on Wednesday, we talk about things, and if I say, hey, your rib system, looks like you're ready to recut that, for the final, go ahead and do that. Even if you don't have, set up an appointment or something to do that. Even if you don't have your components done yet, you can always set up a second appointment to do your components, right? The idea, again, if I go to the modules part, is, let me just go back to the overall project to the sort of overall calendar, right? So again, when it comes to schedule, we are right here in the just over the middle, right over the hump. And so again, Wednesday, we're gonna talk about this the first prototype that you guys did. We'll talk about performance modeling. This is sort of the switcheroo. We're going to talk about performance modeling today, right? But really the first half we'll talk about, I'll do a demonstration and I'll give you some example files for measuring performance when it comes to solar exposure. But then also, the second half we can spend just sort of like troubleshooting as work time, where I can help troubleshoot any problems you guys are having. And a couple of you emailed me over the weekend saying, hey, the Unroll stuff's not working out the way I wanted to. It's really hard to troubleshoot that over email. And I'll be honest with you, most of the weekend I wasn't in front of my laptop. So even harder to troubleshoot Grasshopper when neither of us have it open. But during class today, in the second half of each class today and then Wednesday, we'll have some time to troubleshoot things.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes, Alex, what?
Sorry, I was trying to find a good time to ask you, but when you say prototype, you mean the very first one we started like 2 weeks ago, where you gave us the 2 to select from, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Well,
I just wanted
the first
to clarify.
prototype, yeah, which you've been laser cutting for the last week.
Okay, cool. Okay, I was confused for a second. I don't know why.
Okay. You'll redo that one for the final prototype, right? But this was the draft model. So drawings and diagrams, yeah. So anyway, once we get to the 21st, I'll probably give most of you the approval to start laser cutting more stuff, right? And then you have a week and a half or 2 weeks or so to try to finish up laser cutting the final model. And then parallel with that, we'll start to prepare a detailed exploded axon drawing. Okay. So, yay. The example files that we'll be using this week are right here. Example file 1, unrolling shading of components, measuring performance, and then the third is performance feedback loop. Okay, so they're here for you to download and look at and use if you need to. Okay, in fact, you probably will. All right. I'm going to go ahead and shut down Canvas for the moment. Move that. I'll bring up Rhino. I'm just going to move this off a bit. It's kind of, it doesn't want to let me move it off the desktop. That's great. Maybe I'll flatten it like that. There we go. That's better. Now I'll forget that it's there and later, and that'll be a disaster. But all right, can you guys see Rhino now? Hopefully. All right, so this is where we left off last week, the unrolled shading components, right? Where I took a surface, looked like this, right? And we divided it in the U direction and in the V direction in order to create a series of quads, right? Sort of the cells of a grid, right? In other words, you know, we divided it in U the number of times that we did for our rib system, and then in V the same number of times we did for our rib system. What that does is that gives us the cells that would correspond to the grid shell you guys were already prototyping, right? I just pulled these over here because remember as we went, we saw, let's say, divisions, also some of the critical parameters for the shading components were over here. We wanted to just sort of pull them out to have them and understand that I could change the geometry of these components by, for instance, adjusting this UV location on each checker here that I plotted a point and then we projected up from. And then also there's a height parameter here, and I could adjust again the geometry of these and you know, in addition to that, right? Also adjust the performance of them, right? And at the same time, over here on the XY plane, right, we're getting all the sort of flattened out components. You know, we were just a short way from labeling, putting labels in and all that other stuff, right? Which we've shown examples of. There's also a video or two showing that. So like I said, if you're having problems or issues with this, then, you know, the second part of each class this week would be the time to sort of stick around and ask me a bunch of questions, even share your screen so we can work through them, okay? So then I take this and, you know, I'm just gonna do one thing here. It's driving me crazy. And that is, for this surface, up is down and down is up. And so I'm just gonna flip the direction of it. I'm just gonna double check things. Just select the surface. I'm gonna go to Analyze Direction, and yeah, I need to flip that. Yeah, now up is up and down is down. There we are. That's much better. That'll help us out in a little bit here when we start. Yeah, all right. Okay, so I'll go ahead and open up the next example file here that I gave you guys. There's a bunch of stuff here. Here, how about I just go to recent files? That would help. Measuring performance, right? And so in this case, what we're doing is we're going to, there's several things going on here. One is that I've identified 6 sun trajectories, right? 6 sun angles that we're going to design shading around here, right? So I picked these out just because they seem to be sort of morning sun, you know, sort of east to noon. You know, I could have picked anything, but I just decided to pick this. But the idea here is that, you know, if I only had one sun angle to design for, I could probably pretty easily do that with just adjusting my shaders and a little bit of common sense. But now that I have like 6 that I have to sort of negotiate between, you know, it really kind of helps to sort of see the data and then to actually just use that data to begin to inform the design of my shading components, right? You can see that my shading components are still here, right? See this, just this sort of truncated pyramid just with 2 sides, right? But what I'm doing here is I'm actually measuring how much radiation from each of these sun angles actually hits each of these cells, grid cells, right? And then each cell is actually color-coded now to talk about which ones get the most solar exposure over these 6 rays. That's the bright red. all the way to the ones that get the least, which would be the dark blue. And then there's this sort of gradient in between, right? So we've taken that, that first grasshopper graph, which is, most of it's over here. Here it ends with unroll and moving things and finding the edges, right? But in the front part, I added some new things here. So there's a couple of things. First of all, I take each of my grid checkers and I convert them to meshes, right? That lets me use this solar exposure tool. For some reason, those usually typically only work on meshes, because what it does is it looks at a mesh rather than a surface. It finds all the vertices in the mesh, and then it populates each of these vertices with each of these rays, figures out where the rays are occluded or whether they actually have an impact on each vertice, right? And then they give us a sort of set of energy values out, right? And I take those energy values, right, for each little vertex along each of these cells, and I plug them in so that the minimum will turn out red, the maximum will turn in red, and minimum will turn in blue or green or whatever it is. And then I plug the values in. That generates a set of color values, right, based off of minimum and maximum. And then up here in parallel, I take my meshes and I explode them just to get their vertices and faces. And I remake a new mesh with the exact same vertices and faces, right? It's like, buying several 1967 Mustangs for parts, right? Just so you can make the final perfect Mustang. So anyway, vertices and faces, they plug right into a new mesh, but in this case, I'm also plugging in the color values. So now I make a new mesh with the actual coloration on top, right? And that's a nice way to sort of, as a designer and for a client or anybody that you're a consultant or anybody, to sort of see the data visualized, right? So it's not enough just to have a big long list of numbers, but okay, what does this actually mean, right? And you can see, right, that this thing, kind of corresponds to roughly to, well, it reacts exactly the way we would expect it to if we're measuring the sun angles right at each of these. Okay? So they're coming from this direction, let's say east to, sort of southeast to south. And so the north side is pretty shady, and, and then it sort of gradients out from there, right? All right. So that's just visualizing the performance and generating those performance numbers, okay? There's a bunch of things that I'm doing here. I'm actually generating these sun rays by using a point polar sort of thing. So I could always change the angle for the azimuth or the altitude here and actually change these things. And you'll see, right, that those analysis values actually change, right? So the lower this gets, the more shade we get. The higher it gets, the more solar exposure we get. Okay. All right. So this is the sort of criteria that I'm giving you as far as performance goes, and it generates a set of data that we can actually use, right? So from here, not only can we map the data onto the surface, but it'd be really helpful to map that data and let it inform the geometry of the components. In which case, if you'll remember, these components, if you look at the parameters, the sort of numerical parameters that govern its geometry, right? There's a couple of ways we can do that, but one of the main ways is by changing this UV coordinate. And so if I change this UV coordinate now over to this side, right? Now suddenly you see that these shading components are actually covering most of the cell, right? And so changing where that peak is for the pyramid that I'm drawing, and only, drawing two sides, right, is one way where I could say, maybe there's a way to let that data inform so that the red areas where it gets the most sun over that time would actually be more closed. And then they actually get more and more open as you go from the orange to or red to the orange, and the orange to the yellow, yellow to the blue. Okay. And so over here, perhaps the components over here on the blue might actually be much more open. Okay. And so the next example file, and this is where yours is going to differ from mine, because each of you are going to have your own parameters, right? Because you each have your own geometries. You can't, remember, you can't just do this pyramid with two sides closed. Remember, I told you that was the lame version. That's why I'm doing it as an example. I don't want to take away any of the good options you have to create your own shading component. Okay. But let me just pop this in. And so what I've done in this case is I've used these energy rays. I've done a little bit of math to them to find their minimum maximum. And then I take these and I divide them, so I find them as a percentage, right? So in other words, I take, let's say 3,000 out of a possible score of 6,000. That becomes 0.5, right? So in other words, now I can sort of map these values on as U and V coordinates that can then be plugged in to each of these cells, right? And so you'll see that as I move around this. Hopefully you'll see it. Here, let me see if I can recenter my rotation here. Whereas the red areas, right, have quite a bit of the cell covered, right, by these here, let me just highlight them in green. These components, here they are, right? No, here. Sorry, let me turn these off. Right, you can see them here, the green. It's hard to see them over the colored mesh, but I guarantee you they're there. See? But as it goes further back to the north, right, you can see that these shading components actually get much smaller. Okay, and so they're covering less and less of the actual cell, right? Because they're just simply not as much material is needed, right? It doesn't get as much sun, and so you don't really need it to provide much shade. Right? And so that's the idea here: is how do we complete this feedback loop, right? And that's why it's called performance feedback loop, between the sort of performance data and how we can actually plug that in to inform the geometry of the components that are actually there to help with the performance, right? So we measured the solar exposure here, and then the ones with the cells with the most solar exposure, we knew needed to have more robust shading components, and vice versa. So the ones with less solar exposure needed less robust shading components, right? So that's where we're going with this, right? Is that we can begin to sort of break that sort of Fordism, one size fits all, modernist notion of mass production, right? Where we just make one shading component that performs the best across the entire thing. We can actually begin to create serially differentiated, mass customized componentry that gradient across. And with our laser cutter, it doesn't matter. The laser cutter doesn't care if it's cutting 225 components that are exactly the same or 225 components that are slightly different from the next, right? And so this is what then we are afforded here when it comes to digital technology and digital fabrication. All right. So I encourage you to look at these files. Really, this performance feedback loop, you can use this and it's going to map these across the surface really nicely. You can just plug in your own surface and then change the divisions, right? Go back here to the surface input and say set one surface and set your own, just like you did before. Do the U count and the V count. It should take all of this stuff but really what's going to change is over here where you start to create your own components, and then how you connect up the energy values and do a little bit of arithmetic to them to inform some of these parameters, right? I could have actually had it also inform that sort of height parameter, right? So that maybe these things actually, the sort of spikiness of these components can go up or down depending on how they're supposed to perform as well, right? So that's another opportunity. I didn't plug that in yet, but it's right here, height, in my case, right? For the peak of these sort of pyramids, I could, instead of just plugging in a number slider and giving it one value for all of them, right? I could figure out how to take all of these energy values and multiply them by the height or whatever, we could, or multiply them, I guess, by a multiplier to sort of take them down to a minimum maximum that's more acceptable. And then plug those in as a list of heights rather than just one size fits all height parameter. Right? So Again, that's where I suspect that over this week and next week in class, I'll be helping you guys with this stuff, troubleshooting this stuff, right? For laser cutting, it's not as important to me that you wait around to laser cut the components until you have this part done, right? So if you just have the components and they're all mostly the same across the surface, that's perfectly fine to begin laser cutting for your final prototype. So again, I hope that starts to come into focus as we continue to move forward, because I will be sort of giving you instructions individually as we troubleshoot things, where it's like, okay, you're ready to laser cut these, even though, you know, the final version of them aren't done for your exploded axon or whatever, because the performance data, we need to flip the surface and you need to connect some things up, and you have some data tree lists mismanagement that we need to clear up here and there. That happens, and I expect that to probably happen, right? So that's stuff that we can troubleshoot over the next week or two. Right? But these are the example files that I gave you. Each one just builds off of the other one, right? So you'll notice these are taking the surface and dividing it, building a parametric component on each grid cell, then unrolling them, and then preparing for laser cutting and placing them out in the grid. Over here, you'll see from the second file, you know, just sort of populating the model with some sun rays, some sun directions, and then doing the solar analysis on the surface by converting it into a mesh, plugging in all those values into a gradient scale, and then populating the mesh with new colors to coloration, so you can sort of see the data sort of visualized spatially, right? And then last but not least, taking those energy values and again, using that as data to begin to inform some of these variables down here, like height or UV locations or length or radius, or those sorts of parameters can actually be informed directly from the performance criteria, which I think is really helpful. So it's not just about sort of understanding where the sun is and then trying to make a sort of rule of thumb, but it's quite literally using the data. Let's say these were all sun rays that I were giving you from, let's say, morning time, let's say 10 a.m. from June to September or something like that, right? Because that's the time where we need to really, you know, shade this thing or something like that. Then as a sort of baseline, right, you have your criteria, you can begin to actually plug the data directly in, right? I think that's really important to understand, right? That makes sense, that sort of feedback loop, where we can begin to say, it's not that we can just make anything that looks cool, but that it can also, not only can look cool, but it also satisfies other criteria. And that we can actually let the criteria help design the little itty bitty details and actually become part of the, not only the performance, but also, you know, a sort of pretty interesting gradient aesthetic, right, across the surface, right? It becomes a diagram of the forces that are acting on the site in a way. Pretty interesting. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a time being so I can just sort of make sure that we can answer any questions that you guys might have. Okay. Any questions? If you had problems with the cut sizes, I found that if you did 0.06 thick cuts, then use 0.05 chipboard, it all fit perfectly. See, those are the kinds of things I think are pretty helpful. So how many of you, I mean, we'll talk about this more on Wednesday, but how many of you laser cut and you just nailed like the widths and like things fitting together worked out pretty well?
Making mine was a blast. I had so much fun.
All right, Alex is awesome. Great, Alex, excellent. Raymond, yeah, you got yours. Okay, I see a thumbs up. Caesar, I see a thumbs up, right? Look, I usually call Wednesday's class where we look at the first exam, the first try, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because that's what happens the first time around, okay? I expect a pretty full range of results, bordering from the wildly successful to the ridiculously unsuccessful, abject failures, or whatever you want to call them, right? And everything in between, all those sort of shades of gray in between. So, but I do want to sort of make sure that everybody's learning from both the successes and the mistakes, failures, okay? I used 0.06 thick cuts too. I used 1/2 inch thick ribs, which were a little too thick. It definitely didn't have the flexibility needed. Okay, so you needed to actually sort of bend it a little bit in the plane direction, right? which will happen because these are isoparms. So the laser cutter is accounting for the curvature in the one direction, but then we really are counting on the pliability of the material to get the curvature in the other direction where needed.
I followed everything to the T on what you said to do on everything, except I didn't have the Blake didn't have 0.06 boards, so I only used 0.05 board. But I don't know how thick you said to make each rib itself, like thickness wise.
What was your depth?
I don't know. It's whatever you told us to do on the video.
Oh, I don't know. I think I used 0.25. I think some people found that 0.25 was probably a little too thin. And so these things, when they're cut in half, become a little too wobbly. But it's interesting, like you change one little parameter, like 0.05 from 0.06. And what happens?
But once you've started putting anything together, it actually became really solid and worked really well.
Good.
So it was a little, it seemed wobbly at first, but once you started piecing everything, it became rigid and solid, especially at, I think you said I did 21 each direction, 21 and 21.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I was just doing it for fun. I wasn't really. So, but look, here's the lesson, right? Each of you use certain parameters, right? And some of you are probably off here or there, right? The key thing here is to diagnose and then adjust, try again, okay? Something happened, so let me just go through some of the comments here because I think they're really useful and instructful. And honestly, I think this is the most interesting part of the class, is to sort of tie these things together, right? So just to recap though, just what we were talking about with the performance feedback loop, right? Where we say it's got to perform a certain way. And so now we can use that data and plug it back into the design. We're doing the same thing when it comes to the production side as well. So when it comes to laser cutting, some of you picked the right parameters and really hit the nail on the head, and others did not, right? And so one of the things you're gonna have to do, again, is to diagnose and then readjust. And it's a feedback loop, right? So you plug in the information you learned about, in this case, not solar performance, but structural performance, right? The performance of the material, and then also the sort of practicality or feasibility of how do you put it together, right? And those become also important design concerns that can actually be pumped back into the design. Isn't that cool? I mean, look, isn't that what we all strive for anyway? Right, so. And now you don't have to remodel everything from scratch. It's about adjusting those sliders or entering a number or measuring something and then figuring out how to plug that in as the inputs for your geometry somewhere, okay? I used 1/2-inch thick ribs, which are a little too thick. I definitely didn't have the flexibility needed, right? That's where you might go back and look and see if did you try doing the zigzag scoring or anything at all? Because the scoring, there's different ways you could score it to sort of add a little bit of kerf to it, just to, give it a little bit of flexibility. Mine failed. I went too small on material and rib height. Yeah, so if this material is too thin, or the notches aren't working out with the right thickness, right? I think we talked about that a little bit over the weekend, Christian. Again, if the depth, what we were calling the height, but it's really the sort of structural depth of these ribs, is maybe a little too skinny, then these things are going to be really flimsy, right? And so finding that sweet spot is really important. Maria had the same issue. I use 0.25 and also 0.03 material, shaking my head. All right. All right. Jose, something happened with my file and it went over the bounds. They caught it during the scoring, luckily, but that definitely had something to do with material integrity. Oh, okay. Went over the bounds. You mean outside of the bed of the laser cutter size? Maybe it had to do with scale. Is that what you're saying, Jose?
Yeah, that's what they said. They interrupted my cutting and then they just brought me back and they said it went over the material bounds. We just need to rescale it. And I'm like, okay.
Okay. So that's one of the key things is how it's nested within that 18 by 32 and making sure you give yourself a margin around for that. Because when they scaled it down, then suddenly they can't scale down the actual material thickness. So then the notches are scaled down what you wanted it to be. I don't know if it was too dramatic. I used 0.05 material. This is Julian. But in the script, I entered it in as 0.06, and my joints were a little loose. But with the glue, it assembled perfect. I also did a 0.5 offset. So 1/2 inch depth of offset. And 0.05 material, giving yourself just 1/100 of an inch, 0.06, just a little bit of wiggle room. It was loose at first, but then you had enough wiggle room that, okay, that's interesting. Good job, Julian. Clayton, I had 19 ribs each way. The spacing was great. Could maybe go with 1 or 2 less for the shading components, or else the shade structures will be a little too small and difficult to work. Yeah, and that's another concern, right? Like, you know, that material thickness can only bend, and you can only make, you know, a certain size of component from them, right? I'm actually, if you wanted to just, you know, Clayton, and I'm saying this out loud, but it's really, you know, one of those things where you would just talk to me throughout the process for advice. But, you know, if that was a case where you're like, I actually like this spacing, but the cells are small and I don't think I can make the components out of chipboard, you could always use a thinner material, like a type of paper or cardstock. You could even I've scored tissue paper to make Christmas like elaborate folded Christmas ornaments. So it's all a function of power and speed and PPI pulses per inch with that laser cutter. So it is possible to score like printer bond and then fold it. And, you know, so if you needed something if you wanted to keep cell size small, but then you realize that you just need to decrease the thickness of the material, or you need a material that's slightly different properties to it in order to accomplish that, then there are options in that direction if you were interested in that. Or you could adjust the spacing to, you know, 15 by 15, and then you have larger cells or something like that. Same here as well. My joints were too loose. So they ended up being too loose. I did the zigzag scoring and pre-bent every score line, but it wasn't quite enough to get it working. Okay. The zigzag made it really flexible with the skinny scripts. Okay, there with the skinny script. The laser cutting took off all the labeling numbers though, so it was hell for a while. Oh gosh, really? The laser cutting took off all the labeling numbers. Did it like do through cuts with them or something? Or I'm reading yours, Raymond.
Yeah, like the notches was right over the numbers, and it
Oh,
was
so it
just
cut out
gone.
like, oh gosh. All right. Yeah, you might just, you know, readjust where those are located then, just to make sure that they don't conflict. It's a little bit of pain at the, you know, at the beginning, but it'll save you a lot more time when it comes to putting together the jigsaw puzzle, right? I noticed that and manually moved all the numbers onto the ribs before cutting. Some of them didn't etch properly, however. Interesting. You know, what you can always do, if you only have like 15 ribs and 15 ribs, right? You can always just make your own labels, right? If you explode them, the text objects, then they become outline curves, right? Or if you're doing it in Illustrator, you can always do that in Illustrator as well. Okay.
I went and put them all on the bottom of each of my rib pieces,
Yeah.
and like actually etched it down there.
Yeah.
On the bottom of each one.
Look, here's the thing, right? When you have numbers or letters, it really, I think it looks nice if they're all in the same sort of general location. So they look like they're supposed to be there, and it becomes part of the design. I've also seen other people do it where they create their own labels and they're not letters and numbers. I had somebody that almost like in the sense of like Roman numerals, like they used a set of like architectural like shapes, like squares and lines and circles, in order to create a sort of hash marks along the edges, to sort of understand like 10s and 1s, to sort of say, okay, this one's U11, this one's V9. So you can, you know, that's something again that can be designed, right? And it has to be, if you don't do it, nobody will, right? And so then you'll face the problem that construction on site, right, might be taking a lot longer than was budgeted for, right? And things start to overrun in time and money. For your practical purposes, right, you know, I think it's just a matter of your imagination and how much time you have to devote to it, right? I understand this is in the studio, so. Yeah, I noticed that mailing moved all the numbers on the side. Some of them didn't etch properly. Okay, we just read that one. Antonor, so if we have our design already done for the shading structure and we had in the diagram that you did today, we'll adjust them for optimum shade. Yeah, so when it comes to the shading components, yeah, now that's the key, right? Is how to optimize them. I think that's a great word. Yeah, optimum. To optimize those things based off of those sun rays that I'm giving you, right? So you're going to quite literally open up that last file and copy and paste your own you copy and paste that into your own, that stuff, or take it and then build your component off into that again, you know, one way or the other, right? You're going to use that exact information for measuring the performance and then plugging it back in to your component system. Exactly right. I think that was a good way of putting it, Antonar. Okay. So we'll work on that on Wednesday, for sure. You know, I could go through and tell you what each of these widgets do. It's going to go in one ear and out the other. Honestly, what I'd like for you guys to do is try it. Try figuring out what you need to copy and paste in, and then connecting some things up. Okay, and then on Wednesday we can have a much more detailed, targeted help session where I can just troubleshoot specific issues that you're having. Okay. One thing I will do, and I'll just share my screen again really quickly, not to sort of violently jerk you back and forth between different screens here, but you'll notice that I have this sort of purple square here. What I did is I took certain parts of the graph, and I can select them, and I can hit Control G to group them together. And what that does is that gives me a way that I can say, okay, so here's how I'm generating sun rays, right? So here's a list of X, Y azimuths. Here's an altitude angle. Here's an offset. I'm drawing the line for the ray. I'm even drawing a little sphere to simulate the sun, right? And if I select all of these at once, right, I can copy and paste them from one into the other, right? And I could do that throughout. So if you want to organize these the way you'd like, you know, there's portions of this script that just divide up the surface, right? I'll hit Control G and move those over here. There's parts of this that convert this into a mesh and then add coloration to it, right? I'll just try to keep selecting these things. There we are. Hit Control G and group those together, right? And so sometimes that can actually help you sort of organize the script or the graph a little easier, right? And in fact, if you go to the params tab, you can always add one of these notepad panels, right? And actually add some comments or notes to yourself. This part is all about meshing the surface and measuring solar exposure. I don't know how I can't type today, can't spell. Anybody else here bad spellers? I don't know what it is, but like when I type things out, I'm actually good at spelling because I can see all the typos. When I'm like typing in, you know, when I'm actually doing the typing, then I realize there's a lot of errors. So I have to go back and fix them all. Here we are exploding each of these cells, getting vertices. Let's see this stuff right here. Yeah. So let's put that. This is just creating the components, right? Yeah, that looks good. This is about unrolling and moving them into a grid and adding labels and getting the edges. So we'll put that one over here, right? Okay. And so what I found is that, you know, if you look at these scripts, there's a lot of stuff going on. It looks like a tangled bowl of spaghetti, honestly, right? And particularly if you haven't looked at it in a while, it's really easy to get lost. If you can break it down and be reductive into this part does this, just this portion right here. And then this part over here does this portion. You go, oh, okay, right? It may be a little easier to begin to understand. This is where the rubber hits the road. Control G this bad boy, because this is where we plug in these energy values. We do a little bit of arithmetic. We do some addition. We find the minimum maximum. We remap that minimum maximum and normalize it between 0 and 1. Then we do some subtraction. We plug them in for U's and V's. And then we plug those in instead of this multi-dimensional slider, which I've unhooked. I hook these into the UV coordinates and so on and so forth. So that's how I'm sort of changing all those UV coordinates, you know, based off of these energy values, right? So making some of the shading components closed and some of them open, and all the sort of gradients in between. Okay, sort of a 21st century modernism that's not based on Fordism, but based off of the information economy. All right. Again, just for fun, right? There it is. Okay, let me just stop sharing my screen. All right, so now's the time where I think we're going to turn the page for the day. And I'm gonna just field questions and let other people share their screen if they need some help. I know we had some issues with unrolling the Unroll widget. Antonor, if you don't mind just sending me another quick reminder via email about Unroll, and I can generate that stuff for you once you have your thing going. I can just iteratively do that for you. I mean, you've done really good at keeping the pace up on me. So I had some questions regarding the unrolling. I know Julian did as well. Again, this is work time, so if you guys start to peel off, that's fine. But if you need help, now's the time to ask. Christian, go for it. What did you need? Remind me.
Is my mic working? It is.
Yes, it is.
Sweet. So I had in my shade structure, I had a pyramid going up and a pyramid going down in the same cell.
Uh-huh.
And when I was unrolling it, it looked like they were overlaying on top of each other. Is there a way to separate that so they're in two different?
Yeah. You want to share your screen?
I can.
Okay, I'll make you host. Change host. There you are. You can share your screen whenever you're ready. In the meantime, I'm going to close down Windows. It's taking
Switch it first. Screen one. Sure. Okay. Now let me move this smaller. And turn on my grid. All right, so let me turn one of them off actually. This one looks like they're overlapping right here.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why it's doing that. And then this one, is it the opposite? And they're overlapping as well. So there's something I've done in the soup.
Let's see here. Hold your cursor over this output. Okay, so we're getting one join B rep, 120 of them. Okay. And then same with this one. Okay, same thing. You have 120 cells?
Yes. I did a 10 by 12 grid.
Okay. All right, so then we have, can you just hold your cursor over the output here for the Unroll widget? Okay, one each, 120. Same thing here, I assume. Okay, now let's look at this. You have a different grid here and a different grid here?
Yes. This one's a little bit wider
The
than...
preview's turned off for this one?
Yes. You want me...
No, you can turn it off.
Okay.
Sorry. Let me just clear those out. All right, can you...
sorry.
Can you hold your cursor over each of these, the G and the T? So, okay, that's a list of 120 B reps, a list of 244 points. Ah, we have 244 points somehow, instead of 120. All right, so let's go look at this.
Okay.
All right, so we're plugging in, we're subtracting 1. Okay, so hold your mouse over these inputs and outputs. Okay, yep.
Oh.
Spacing, yep, that's fine. Number?
It's 1 and 4. That was the...
11, so that would give us 12 points, and then an 11, so that would give us 12 points, right? So then the points coming out, it says 244, 22, wait, what?
It switched to 12. Why did it do that? N 22, and then it switched to N12 at the bottom there.
Yeah, I don't get that either. I don't know why there's 22.
Is it maybe?
'No, the size is the spacing in between. Well, wait a second. You have this plugged in. So we have 12, 11, and 11. So we're supposed to have 12 by 12, right? And the square of
10
12
by
is 144.
10 by 12, right?
10 by 12. So you need a separate one of these to plug in for this. So you have 12 and 10 or 10 and 12 or 11 and 9 or whatever it is, right?
So I need to duplicate this
Yeah,
because they're two different inputs.
yeah, exactly. So go back now to, this is fine, but go back here and see what's being plugged in here. So you need, here's your divisions, right? This one should go, oh,
Yep, sorry, I was zooming in a little bit.
so this one should go in one of them and this one should go in the other one of them, right? So that you have 120 points.
Okay.
All right.
So
So that's one of the reasons why you have kind of a goofy, weird thing there. All right. So let's see what we're getting in and what we're getting out. Hold your cursor over the R. 11, and then what's the other R? Also 11. Yeah. Wait,
I
what?
still have the 2 plugged in on this one.
Okay, so you need to have the 10 plugged in on that one, right? All right. So we have 11.
I did do it. It did it again. It's the same thing, isn't it? Maybe not. I don't.
You have 2 values here. Here, look at this input. 1, -1. Then here, disconnect everything. Just right click and say disconnect. I don't know why it says you have 2 things plugged in. Okay. What about this one? Just 1. All right. Okay. So now you just need to replug in into A. Yeah.
Was oh.
Keep my fingers crossed. Don't hold down the shift key.
Don't hold down.
Yeah, because it looks like you're trying to plug in more than one thing, and you just want one thing plugged in. Okay, that's probably what happened. So that's good. That's fine. 10. So all right. Now, so that's 9. Yeah. Okay.
And that's
11.
okay. That should be good.
So this looks like it should be good. Now look at the points coming out. Wait, where's my?
Yeah. That looks right.
120 values, and there should be 120 pieces of B reps or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that should work now.
Yeah, it looks like it's correct.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Gorgeous.
So I probably have that.
Isn't that nice? Good. You'll need to do the same thing up here.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha. Thank
Okay.
you.
No problem.
I think I'm good.
Cool, cool. All right, I'm going to
Josh.
reclaim host from you. Anybody else?
Could you help me out, Josh?
Sure can. I'm going to let you share your screen as well.
Okay.
As soon as I find you here on my list. All right, make host, change host. Feel free to share your screen any given time. Sorry
All right,
if I seem a little preoccupied, it's because I have landscapers in the backyard trying to do things, and I'm expecting somebody to come and also do some things around the house here. All right, so don't know why they're not here yet.
All right. So
Okay, cool.
so basically, I have.
You're having a join explode issue, first of all. It looks like. Can we look at your unroll component really quick? Okay, hold your cursor over this join input. That's set to false. Go ahead and right click, set Boolean, and set that to true. All right, that way they won't be exploded. So that's going to help you out immensely, first and foremost.
Okay.
All right, now.
Yeah, I was trying to
Let's
change
see
that.
how many unrolled there are. If you hold your cursor over the unrolled output, 154. 154. All right. Okay. Now, let's see how many points you have here.
Right here.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so you have 180.
Yeah.
All right.
It's a
This
12
is
by
what you were telling me about, right?
Yeah.
So why do you have
Because
154 things, but you only have 180? So is this divided like 8 by 10 times or something?
12 by 15.
12 by 15.
Yeah. And instead of
Okay.
doing like the subtract widget, I just subtracted one from each of these.
12 times 15 is 180. Okay. So 180 works out. So why do you only have 154? So that's a loft. All right. 154 lofts. You only have 154 lofts. Okay. So how many curves are you pulling in here? All right. Instead of holding in the input, let's look at the output for each of the things that you're inputting in. So there and there.
My bad. Here?
Yeah. So 154 there. And then what's over here? 154. Where's 154 coming from? All right. We're going to have to go backwards. All right. Give me just a sec here. So you're finding the centroid. Okay, great. So you plugged it in, you found the centroid point. You're plugging that in. What is this doing? It gives you a UV parameter where that point's located. You're using that to generate a point at that space. You're using the normal to move upwards. You're moving it. Are you scaling it and then moving it? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Got it. So this is like a truncated pyramid.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have 4 sides that need to be unrolled.
Yeah.
All right. So let's come back to here. See the surface output? How many of those do you have? Right here. 154. I think you just have 154 pieces of geometry. Here, right here. What about this? 14 and, yeah, these numbers have changed on you. 14 and 11. Well, 15 and 12, you said, right? Okay, I see. Never mind.
Yeah.
So you wanted, hold on. So you have, but these are the number of divisions. So I don't think you need to, that's how many ribs you'll get. But the cells you're going to get are 14 by 11. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
So should I leave these as 15 by 12 and then when I do
Count the number
When I
of
put it-
cells you have and not the ribs on your prototype. That'll tell you how many cells you need in the U and the V.
it's 15 by 12 cells.
Cells, so 16 by 13 number of ribs. So yeah, you need to change those to 15 and 12. And then everything should work because then you should have 180 components. Right now you just have 154 cells, not 180 cells. So if you change that to 12 and 15, might take a minute for it to upload or update. It's got a lot of stuff to calculate out, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's see. First of all, let's just follow it down the line and see if it's working as we predict. Hold your cursor over this S, see how many surfaces we get out, or how many domains.
180.
Here, 180, and then here.
Where at? My bad.
Hold on, let me clear my markings here. No, for some reason this is not clearing. Turn off my, sorry. Okay, there it is. Cancel. Annotate, here we go. So here. So say 180, I can't see it.
Yeah, 180.
Okay. All right. Now, come over this direction to the unroll component.
My bad. It's 180 as well.
Yeah. So go ahead and right click on the icon here. Right click on the icon here. And say, turn the preview off. Click the preview option. All right. Yeah, that looks good. That looks like it's working now.
Okay.
Those were all
what's-
of the unrolled versions smashed on top of each other at the 000 point. So I just turned off the preview so you don't see all those overlaps. Right?
Okay.
They're still
But-
there. And they're still being calculated. I just don't want to see them. So you can turn off their preview. This is what
Okay.
you really want, is all these things spread out across the grid, right? So,
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I figured that'd be a lot easier to figure out by sharing a screen here. It's usually where I would just say, okay, scoot over and let me drive for a moment.
I
Let's
was
see what's
trying to
going
read
on.
your email, and I was so confused. Thank you.
All right, yeah, no problem. Anybody else at the moment need any help?
Yeah, Josh. I'm trying to create this curved, this curve in one of my surfaces, but I don't. Let me just share my screen.
You are the host. Go ahead and share. I'm just going to spit up my gum. I'll be right back. Okay. Sorry, I keep. They were supposed to install artificial turf in my backyard this weekend, and they ran out of supplies, and they had to come back this morning. So it's like looking forward to having a backyard that's actually usable here soon. All right, Caesar. I don't. Yeah, share when you're ready. I think I made you host. So.
Could you make Caesar Wazowski host? Because that's
Wait. Oh,
that's my desktop.
Oh, okay. Caesar, where are you here?
I'm currently on my laptop. And my
Caesar Wazowski. All right. Is that like Mike Wazowski?
Yes.
All right. Man, that brings back some memories back when my kids liked stuff like that. Mike Wazowski. All right. Here you go, Caesar Wazowski. It's all you.
All right. So,
In fact, there was a time where I would have to drag them around to try to get them asleep. We had these DVD players in the car. So I would hear Monsters, Inc. over and over.
so currently I have this surface right here, this trapezoid, but I want to create this curvature right here. I mapped out all the lines in my Grasshopper file.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I create a surface, I think this is the one I'm using. And so when I'm doing all
Yeah, from planar curves.
yes,
Okay. Let's see
it
here.
creates. Huh.
Well, it's turning orange, so that's also not so good.
Yeah.
All right. Can I see what the message it's showing is? Above the orange widget, there's that. Okay. Planar surface routine returned no results. What does it say? Boundary. Okay. All right. Really quickly, if you zoom in maybe on an area like this, and we can select each of these, and I want to just double check in my mind what each of these are by turning them green. Okay, so there we have that curve. Okay, that curve. Okay, so it quite literally is a sort of arc at the top of a trapezoid. You have a straight component here. Is that what it's doing, or is it just not doing what you want with it?
That is, yeah, that's my initial one, and I wanted to replace it with the curve.
Here's why I suspect this isn't working. It's because you don't have a planar component. So let's go ahead and you can get rid of that widget, and let's look for a different one we can use.
Okay.
If you go to the free form and click this so you can get the range of options here, go to edge surface. Let's try that one. That doesn't, the requirement isn't to be planar, so that might actually work. Hopefully. Now go ahead and select this. Yeah. Ta-da! Yay! Don't you love it when a plan comes together?
All right. Okay, cool.
That was it, right? And so it needed that, the one you were using, it needed a set of closed planar curves. They were closing up, but they weren't planar. That's the problem when you have quads. Sometimes the quads you can never guarantee the quad is planar. In fact, it's a real fluke when they actually are, right? Okay, but that seems to work now, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent.
Appreciate it.
I'm going to reclaim the host from you. Anybody else? I'm on a roll. Bring it. Shoot, I'm going to go outside and do my own landscaping now. I'm unstoppable. All right. Well, shout at me if you guys need anything, because we have a little bit of time. We have about 14 minutes of class left. So I'm here to help out if you're running any difficulties. If not, I'll see you on Wednesday. I can't wait to see these photos of what you guys came up with. Like I said, I usually call this the good, the bad, and the ugly time. It really is a mix of stuff.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, I heard somebody trying to talk. Is that you, Ruben?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay, now I'm hearing you a little better. Yeah, what's up?
So for when we are gonna be able to laser cut our shade structure and our rib structure again,
Yeah.
do we use the same thing we signed up for the laser cutting time?
Yeah, you'll go to the lab website and find the schedule so you can sign up for time. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if he's going to have one dedicated to us again, but
Right.
you know, we have a while. We have until the beginning of November, and I can even go over if we need it. I don't really
Okay,
care.
so we won't have to worry that until a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, I expect some people might be ready to start laser cutting some stuff by the next time we meet on Wednesday. But I expect over next week, a lot of you will be doing some laser cutting.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. Sorry, I got that song stuck in my head. Oh no. Oh no.
So I have a quick question. So
Yep.
the files you gave us today, are we basically gonna be uploading to our Grasshopper files already, or?
Portions of them. What I want you to do is open them up. Look at
Okay.
the part where we map the color on,
Okay.
right? And if you think you can sort of select that part and copy and paste it into yours, then go for it. Try it. If you're worried that you're going to screw something up, save a copy of yours first before you.
Okay.
That way on Wednesday, if it works, perfect. If not, I can help you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording.